Hey everybody, it's Lori, and I am here today to do the nonfiction on Booktube tag. This is a tag originated by Olive at a Book Olive, who is one of my very favorite people to watch on YouTube. And it basically is helping people who read nonfiction to find each other. So I'm hoping that this leads me to some more great channels that discuss nonfiction books. Maybe not all the time, but at least some of the time. So I'm going to get started with these questions, and we'll see how this goes. So the first question is, how much nonfiction do you read? And being a super nerd, I actually keep a kind of bookish bullet journal type thing. So I whipped out my little pie charts that I make in there every year because I'm the type of person who puts pie charts in there. And it's a little difficult for me because I don't categorize all nonfiction as the same thing from year to year because I read quite a bit of it. So a lot of times these numbers would be like books I classified as nonfiction plus books I classified as memoir plus books I classified as Catholic. Now, every once in a while, one of those Catholic books will be a fiction book, but generally speaking, 99.9% of the books I categorize under Catholic are going to be nonfiction religious books. So I just lumped those all together. So back in 2015, I read 28% nonfiction. At that point in time, I was reading a lot of junior fiction. My girls were a lot younger. We were doing a lot of read alouds, so that probably is part of that. And then also just pre-reading books for them at that point. In 2016 was 26%. Again, I was reading a lot of junior fiction at that point. In 2017, apparently my kids got old enough that I wasn't reading as much junior fiction or read alouds, but I did 42% nonfiction type books. And so I read 21% of those, or of my books that year, I had classified under just nonfiction in general. In 2018, it was 43%, and my nonfiction was 23%, like the nonfiction itself. The rest was memoir and Catholic books. And then so far this year through October, I have read 33% nonfiction, encompassing nonfiction, memoirs, etc. And I do expect that number to go up because I am working on quite a few right now, and I have quite a large nonfiction November TBR planned. So I guess overall I'm going to say I read probably 60% fiction and 40% nonfiction. But to be perfectly honest, when I was first married up to about the time my kids were like 3 and 5, I probably read 85 to 90% nonfiction. I didn't know how to find good fiction at that point in time, so that was part of the problem, but I really do love a good nonfiction book. Question number 2 is, what kind of nonfiction videos do you make or do you want to make on Booktube? So I think my favorite kind of nonfiction-ish videos that I make are, I like to do these triple book review and discussions with my husband. He also likes to read quite a bit of nonfiction, and it just is a good time for us to come together and talk about some books that we think kind of fit together. So we have one for sure already up. We just filmed another one today. The first one we did have one fiction book out of the 3, but the other 2 were nonfiction. And then the one we just filmed that probably will go up after this video is a triple book review and discussion on 3 different memoirs. So, if you like that sort of thing, come back and check that out. We're going to be discussing Hillbilly Elegy, Educated, and Made. So those are probably my favorite. I like talking about nonfiction in my wrap-ups. I like talking about the nonfiction books I pick up in my book hauls, but those are kind of my most nonfiction, almost specific videos that I do. Number 3 is, what's your favorite subgenre of nonfiction? This one is hard. As I mentioned, I do read a lot of memoirs in that, I categorize those separately a lot of years because I read so many of them. And I'm going to go with probably memoir and Catholic books are going to be my 2 biggest subgenres, just because I read a lot of both. So Catholic books could be theology books. They could be books about saints. They could be practical life stuff. They could be memoirs. So that's a little hard, but I do really enjoy Catholic books. I really enjoy memoirs. I really enjoy books on homeschooling. I have a few too many subgenres. I also enjoy books on like economics and frugal living and money. I like money books. So those are some of my main subgenres of nonfiction that I tend to read. They're most likely to grab my attention. Do you have a favorite nonfiction book? We're probably going to go with this one, The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. I actually have quite a few favorite nonfiction books. Grab a couple more off my shelves here. These are ones that I have read many, many times. The Encyclopedia of Country Living, because I've always thought that I could be much more country than I actually am, but I'd rather just stay inside and read about somebody else doing all the gardening and animal husbandry and that sort of stuff. So this is not a practical thing, but I have read this very large book on country living multiple times. This one I've read so much that it's falling apart. That's the Complete Tightwad Gazette by Amy Decision. And this one, like, I've had this forever, and I love the recipes in it. It was actually a newsletter she wrote, so it's still in newsletter form, but it's like all of her newsletters compiled into one gigantic book. I think I originally read some of them. This was originally published as 3 separate books, and I had to have my own copy of it, and clearly it has seen better days, so that's another favorite. But I would say that right now, my favorite is The Happiness Project. I haven't read this copy. This copy I picked up at a thrift store. I've listened to this on Audible a couple of years ago, and it really affected me to the point that I started a Facebook group for friends to try to do like the Happiness Project challenges. That was in 2018. I have over on my nightstand a 5-year sentence a day happiness journal for moms that Gretchen Rubin put out, that I have been consistently writing in for almost 2 years now. So this is definitely one of my very favorite nonfiction books, but I probably could wander around my house and find 15 more books that I would call one of my favorites of nonfiction. Question number 5 is, what do you think keeps people from wanting to read more nonfiction? Now, this is one that I've contemplated a lot because both of my daughters will say they don't like to read nonfiction. I would argue they are wrong, but you know, they can argue that. Eva, my older daughter, really does like to read a lot of nonfiction books. She doesn't read them cover to cover, so I think she thinks she doesn't like reading nonfiction because she doesn't read the book cover to cover, but she'll check out all these nonfiction titles and read bits and pieces. So I think one of the problems is the concept that if you read something, you have to read it from page 1 to last page all the way through, or it doesn't count. So she also really likes things that are illustrated, but she feels like, I think almost that that's cheating, that it's not really nonfiction if it has a bunch of pictures, which I think is also another kind of weird thing. I think the biggest thing, however, is that people associate nonfiction with school. And maybe they had some nonfiction that they didn't like that they had to read in school, maybe in a textbook, maybe something else. But I think people think nonfiction reading is work. And maybe it is because in people's jobs, more often than not, if there's reading involved, it's going to be nonfiction works. And then we have this whole problem. Okay, here we go. Testing / educational rant from me, because I have a lot of these. Then we have the whole problem of like the Common Core thing now. I am not like a let's all totally freak out because Common Core exists kind of person. I do know people like that who just cannot even handle Common Core math. Common Core math does not bother me at all. Common Core English standards, they bother me because there's this move towards reading more informational text and less literature. And not only is that bad because you're not getting all that great literature that you could be exposed to, but it's also bad because I think it's going to ruin people's taste for nonfiction when they're forced to read like appliance manuals or whatever. I mean, I don't even know. Some of the stuff they suggest is just weird, but if you're just making the kids do a whole bunch of like tedious nonfiction reading to prove that they can do tedious nonfiction reading, which seems to be what the standards are asking for, that's just going to kill interest in nonfiction further. So, okay, sorry, rant over. But I think the biggest reasons are that it feels like work, and it feels like it doesn't count if you don't read it from beginning to end. And with nonfiction, much more so than fiction, you don't necessarily have to read something from beginning to end. Like you can read part of a book and you've still gotten great information out of it. But with a fiction book, you know, you can't be like, well, I read the first 6 chapters, so, because there's a storyline that goes all the way through. But with nonfiction, you could read 6 chapters of a coding book and have learned enough that you don't need to read the next 6 chapters. I would not read any of the chapters. The coding was an example of my oldest daughter. I don't code. I'm technologically impaired. Number 6 is, why do you like nonfiction? I like nonfiction because I'm an extremely practical person. And this isn't to say that I don't like fiction, because I read a lot of fiction too. But I like to learn things. I like to know how things work. I like to know why somebody did something. I like to know about history. So I like to have all this random knowledge. For what reason? I don't know. It's just kind of how I'm built. So like, I have read at our local library like entire sections of the nonfiction, the things that I'm interested in. I have probably read every book they have. I've read every book on homeschooling at our local library and at our regional library, and I have half a shelf of homeschooling books. I've read every book on frugal living or parenting or whatever. The topics that interest me, I will just read the entire shelf that is available at the library, because I am just interested in knowing more and more about the things that I'm interested in. And the cool part about that is that sometimes you find out from reading something that you're super interested in that there's something else that you might be interested in, and then you can go move over to that section of the library and start reading all of those books. So I guess that's kind of why I like nonfiction. Okay, number 7 is, what's a nonfiction book you read because of Booktube? And I'm going to go with one that I just filmed a review on, which will probably be up later than this. And that is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, A Therapist, Her Therapist, and Our Lives Revealed by Lori Gottlieb. I saw Olive from a Book Olive do a review on this book, and it just sounded really interesting. It's not like I ran out and purchased it, but the next time I went to a regional library, lo and behold, this was sitting there. I was like, ooh, I want to read that. So this was probably the most recent nonfiction, but there's been multiple in the year or so that I've been watching book videos on YouTube. Number 8 is, what's the best nonfiction book you've read lately? Now, to be perfectly honest, the answer to this would probably be that Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, because I did give that one 5 stars, and I read it last month. So I kind of cheated and went to my Goodreads to scroll through to see what was the book before that I gave 5 stars that was a nonfiction book. And it was actually a reread and one of my very favorite books that I didn't think about when I was talking about my favorite nonfiction books. And that's Teaching from Rest, A Homeschooler's Guide to Unshakable Peace by Sarah Mackenzie. It's a very short, very to the point, somewhat practical book about homeschooling, about how to, got a lot of glare, about how to teach from a place of not being panicked as a mother, because it's so easy as a homeschooler to fall into this, oh my goodness, I'm failing my kid mentality. So I really, really enjoy this book, and I've got lots and lots of highlighting in it. It's just one of those that I like to come back to pretty frequently, so I really do suggest that this book for anybody who homeschools or is thinking about homeschooling. Teaching from Rest is one of my absolute favorite homeschooling books. Number 9 is, what are some of your nonfiction reading goals? So obviously I'm trying to read more nonfiction for Nonfiction November. I want it to be more than 50% of my reading as nonfiction this month. But I don't know that I really have a lot of specific goals for reading nonfiction. It just appeals to me, so it's very easy for me to pick up. I would like to get through some of my books that I've had around for a long time that I haven't read. And the two bookcases in my kitchen are almost exclusively nonfiction. I've got a science shelf, a history shelf, a music and art shelf, a math shelf. A lot of our homeschool books are there. So there's a little bit of literature mixed in to the homeschool stuff. But then I have a history shelf, kind of a general nonfiction shelf, and a memoir shelf. And I would say a great portion of all of those shelves are books that I want to read, but I haven't read. So I think one of my goals in particular for 2020 might be to get some of that read. Now, I don't want to say I'm not going to read other stuff because I go to the library and get distracted like everybody else. But I'm going to try to make more progress on reading some of those books and deciding whether I want to keep them or pass them along. Okay, number 10 is, what's your advice for incorporating more nonfiction into your reading diet? That is a hard question. So I would say my advice would be to perhaps pick something you really enjoy to read about. So this could be all sorts of things. Like my kids have been swimmers for several years now. And so I have read several swimming memoirs, one by Missy Franklin, one by Michael Phelps. I feel like there was a third one in there that I can't come up with. So their interest in swimming, our interest in a family in kind of more competitive swimming had led me to reading some of those books. Or, if you are thinking, I'd really like to get my life in order when it comes to money, read some different books on financial planning. There's so many great ones that I would recommend. There's always the Dave Ramsey books, like the Total Money Makeover. There's all sorts of books for moms in particular who are dealing with trying to keep the budget. One I remember is Miserly Moms. You could get into some of the different investing books. I know that a channel I follow on YouTube, The Financial Diet, I think she has a book that might be called The Financial Diet, but I'm not totally sure what the name of her book is. But if there's a YouTuber that you're a fan of, you could read their book, particularly if it's on a topic you're interested in, or if you just think it would be interesting. If there's a celebrity you're interested in, pick up a celebrity memoir. If you're interested in fashion, pick up some books about fashion. Pick up a book about a musician, find a memoir about somebody that you find interesting, look at a time period in history that you're interested in. A really great one for right about now would be maybe picking up some nonfiction books about the 1920s. It can't just be our little tiny town that's coming up with a charity, a 1920s themed New Year's party with the proceeds going towards a local nonprofit. I'm sure that's happening other places too, because who isn't thinking of Roaring 20s now that we're going to be going into 2020? So pick up something on the 1920s. That might be fascinating. So pick something that you're interested in and find a book, or just wander through the nonfiction section of the library and just look for something that piques your interest. I really kind of randomly was wandering through the memoir section of the library a while back, and I think the name of it was Me, Myself, and Bob. And it was a memoir by one of the two guys that kind of got the whole VeggieTales thing started. So that one was fascinating, but would I have ever gone to look up founders of VeggieTales memoirs? No, but it was called Me, Myself, and Bob, and it had Bob the Tomato on the cover, and that was enough to get me to take it home. So wander through the library, see what you can find. You'll probably find something interesting that you didn't know existed. And then the bonus question is give some recommendations of nonfiction booktube channels that you love. To be honest, I need to expand my horizons. I only have a certain amount of time to watch videos, and so I don't have a lot yet of booktube channels that focus more on nonfiction, but there are two that I would highly recommend that I do watch frequently. The first, of course, is Olive from A Book Olive, who started this tag and does the whole Nonfiction November thing. So clearly I watch a lot of her videos. And then the other one would be Rachel Ray. She also reads some fiction, but she always has the most interesting nonfiction selections. So I really enjoy seeing all of her book reviews, both fiction and nonfiction. So I will link those two channels in the description box below. So that was the Nonfiction on Booktube tag. That's what it's called, right? Please let me know below if you have a booktube channel that you would recommend to me, particularly that does some nonfiction reading, because I'm lazy and I haven't found people yet. I'm hoping that this tag will help me find a lot of great people talking about nonfiction. So, let me know below if there's somebody that I definitely should go check out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.